Story number 1.
The fluorescent lights above flickered intermittently, casting an eerie glow over the nearly empty corridors of the mall. It was past closing time, and the only people left were a few stragglers finishing up their shopping. The sounds of footsteps echoed softly against the polished marble floors, their hollow reverberations swallowed up by the expansive, nearly deserted building. Mall security, a small team working the night shift, walked their usual rounds with little to do except wait for the shift to end. There had been whispers over the past few months, strange things happening in the dark, unexplained noises, unsettling shadows that seemed to move on their own. But it was just gossip, the kind of thing people in places like this talked about when the workday was done, when their minds wandered to things that weren't so easily explained. After all, malls were big, often old places filled with hidden nooks and crannies, places where the imagination could easily run wild. James, a lanky security guard with a lazy disposition, wasn't one to worry about such things. He had been working the night shift for almost a year, walking the same halls night after night, checking the same empty stores and closed restaurants. He had his routine. Make his rounds, check the doors, and sit at the security desk in the back office, scrolling through his phone until it was time to clock out. The stories, though, seemed to catch his attention every now and then. One of his coworkers, Sarah, had mentioned feeling as though someone was watching her whenever she worked alone. She was a nervous type, so he didn't think much of it. But she wasn't the only one. James wasn't particularly superstitious. He liked the quiet of the night shift, and the weirdness of the mall, though it gave him an occasional chill, didn't bother him much. That is, until the night everything changed. It started like any other Thursday night. The usual sounds of a mall at closing time, the low hum of the HVAC system, the soft murmurs of the few remaining shoppers, filled the space as James made his way down the hall near the food court. It was just past 10:30 p.m., and the last of the food court workers were cleaning up. He had already checked the rest of the mall. The clothing stores, the electronics shop, the empty arcades. He had a few more stores left to inspect before he could go on his break. As he passed the fountain in the center of the mall, something caught his eye. It was faint, almost imperceptible, a shadow near the edge of the food court. He stopped, squinting into the dim light, unsure if his mind was playing tricks on him. But as he focused, he saw it again. A figure standing still and unmoving, just beyond the tables and chairs. It was too dark to make out any details, but James felt a strange unease creep up his spine. His radio crackled to life. "James, you there?" It was Sarah, her voice muffled but clear. "I'm here," James replied, still watching the shadow. "There's something weird going on in the back of the mall," Sarah said. "I think someone's been messing with the storage rooms. I've heard some sounds back there." James was about to respond when the shadow shifted. He froze. It wasn't a person, at least not the way he had expected. The figure moved with a jerky, unnatural motion, like it was struggling to maintain balance. It wasn't a man, but something else entirely. The figure took a few steps forward before disappearing behind the column of the food court. "James?" Sarah's voice came again, this time with a note of concern. "Hold on," James whispered into his radio, his hand tightening around the flashlight he had been carrying. He stepped cautiously toward the food court, his eyes scanning every corner, his heart rate picking up. The air around him felt thick, heavy, as though the mall itself was holding its breath. When he reached the spot where the figure had disappeared, he looked around, but there was no sign of it. The area was empty, and the only sound was the distant hum of the air conditioning system. He stepped closer to the fountain, his flashlight now aimed at the dark corner where he had seen the movement. Nothing. He let out a slow breath and turned back to his radio. "I think it's nothing," he said, trying to convince himself as much as Sarah. "Just some weird shadows. Maybe the lighting's playing tricks on me." "Okay," Sarah replied, her voice still hesitant. "But be careful, all right? I don't like this." "Yeah, I'm fine," James said, trying to reassure her as he walked away from the food court. "I'll check out the back storage like you asked. Maybe we've got a prankster on our hands." But something about the way the shadow had moved lingered in his mind. It wasn't natural. It wasn't human. Still, he pushed the thought aside, focusing on the more mundane task at hand. He made his way through the labyrinth of hallways toward the back of the mall, past the loading docks and maintenance rooms. The lights were dimmer back here, the air thick with the musty scent of old boxes and forgotten stock. As he approached the storage area, he heard the unmistakable sound of something scraping against the concrete floor. He paused, his hand tightening on the flashlight. "Hello?" he called out. His voice was met with silence, save for the soft hum of the ventilation system. He stepped forward cautiously, following the sound. It came from the far end of the storage room. He pushed the door open slowly, revealing a space cluttered with old furniture, boxes of unmarked merchandise, and piles of discarded plastic wrap. The light flickered overhead as he shined his flashlight into the room. Nothing. The scraping sound had stopped. James felt a chill run through him, the hairs on the back of his neck standing on end. The unease he had felt earlier now settled into a heavy knot in his stomach. He backed out of the room and made his way to the next section of the mall. As he walked, he kept hearing the sound of faint footsteps behind him, light and quick, like someone was walking just out of his line of sight. He turned suddenly, his flashlight beam slicing through the darkness, but there was nothing there. No one. Just the empty hallways stretching out before him, too quiet, too still. His heart was racing now, and he quickened his pace, eager to finish his rounds. But as he passed the last of the stores and neared the security desk, he saw something that made his blood run cold. The doors to the food court were wide open, even though they should have been locked, and standing just inside, staring back at him from the shadows, was the figure again, the one he had seen earlier. It wasn't moving anymore, just standing there, still and silent, its form almost blending into the darkness. James didn't think. He ran, his feet pounding against the floor as he headed toward the office, adrenaline pushing him faster than he had ever moved before. When he reached the security desk, he slammed the door shut behind him, heart racing. Sarah's voice crackled through the radio. "James? What happened? Are you okay?" He didn't answer right away. He was trying to steady his breathing, his mind racing as he thought about what he had just seen. There was something in that mall, something wrong. And now he wasn't sure if it was going to let him leave. "I need to get out of here," he said, his voice low and shaky. "Something's not right, Sarah. I think there's something in the mall." The radio crackled, but the line was silent. James glanced toward the window, the faint reflection of his own wide-eyed face staring back at him. But it wasn't just him in the reflection. There was something else, a shadow standing just behind him. He turned, but there was nothing there. But the feeling of being watched, of being followed, wouldn't leave him. It stayed with him as he made his way to the exit, and it followed him home that night. The next day, when James returned to work, things were different. The mall was the same, quiet, empty, but the unsettling feeling that had gripped him the night before was still lingering in his mind. He couldn't shake the feeling that whatever he had seen was still there, waiting. And when he mentioned the strange figure to Sarah, her eyes widened in recognition. "You saw it too?" she whispered. "You're the first. No one else believes me. But it's real. It's here." The shadow had been haunting the mall for years, she said. Sometimes it appeared as a flicker in the corner of the eye, other times more clearly, moving through the empty halls like it owned the place. No one knew what it was, but it wasn't human. And the stories? They all ended the same. The mall was cursed, and now James was part of the story. Story the end.
Story number 2.
The mall was never really empty. Even long after the lights dimmed and the last shoppers left, something remained. Eric had worked as a night security guard at the Westfield Center Mall for almost 2 years. It was a mundane job, mostly consisting of walking the floors, checking for any unlocked doors, and ensuring that no one had sneaked inside after hours. The pay wasn't great, but the quiet of the graveyard shift suited him. He liked the stillness, the eerie calm that settled over the massive building once the crowds were gone. But something about the mall always felt off. It had started with small things. Objects moving from where they had been left, mannequins facing different directions, the occasional whisper of footsteps when he knew he was alone. At first he blamed it on exhaustion, on his own mind playing tricks, but then the security footage started showing things he couldn't explain. One night, While sitting in the security office, sipping lukewarm coffee and watching the monitors, Eric saw something that made his stomach drop. A woman, tall, wearing a long coat, standing in the middle of the food court. The problem was, the mall had been locked up for over an hour. Eric leaned forward, adjusting the camera angle, expecting a glitch. The woman stood unnaturally still, her head tilted slightly to the side. The grainy footage made it hard to make out details, but there was something unsettling about the way she was standing. Too rigid, too deliberate. Eric picked up his radio. "Tony, you see this?" Tony was the other security guard on duty that night, doing his rounds on the upper level. A few seconds passed before his voice crackled through the speaker. "See what?" "Check camera 5. Food court." There was a long pause. Then Tony responded, his voice uneasy. "There's nothing there, man." Eric's eyes stayed locked on the monitor. The woman hadn't moved an inch. "You don't see her? She's right in front of..." And then she was gone. Not like she walked away. Not like the camera cut out. 1 second she was there, and the next the space was empty. Eric's breath caught in his throat. His pulse pounded in his ears. He switched through the other camera angles, scanning the halls, the shops, the exit doors. Nothing. He rubbed his eyes, telling himself he needed more sleep. Maybe it had been a glitch after all. The rest of the night was quiet, but the feeling of unease stayed with him. A week later, Tony called out sick, leaving Eric to do the shift alone. He didn't mind at first. It meant fewer rounds, more time at the desk. But something felt different that night. The air inside the mall felt heavy, the silence too deep. At around 2 a.m., as he was making his usual walk down the west wing of the mall, he heard it. Footsteps. Slow, deliberate, echoing faintly from somewhere behind him. He turned quickly, shining his flashlight down the long hallway. Nothing. He continued walking, this time faster. But the moment he passed the entrance to the abandoned department store, something moved in his peripheral vision. A figure, standing just inside the darkened store. Eric's breath hitched as he turned, directing his flashlight into the empty space. Empty. Just rows of old shelves, dust-covered floors, and the faint smell of mildew. But he had seen it. He knew he had seen it. A cold sweat broke across his neck as he stepped back, forcing himself to turn away. He needed to finish his rounds. He walked quickly through the remainder of the mall, heart pounding, hands clenched around the flashlight. The sense of being watched never left him. When he reached the security office, he locked the door behind him. Just as he sat down, something on the monitor caught his attention. Camera 9, the hallway near the old department store. The image was grainy, static buzzing at the edges, and there she was, the woman, standing just inside the store, barely visible in the shadows. Eric felt his stomach twist. This time she wasn't just standing still, she was looking directly into the camera. And then her mouth started to open. Wider and wider. Too wide. The screen flickered, and then she was gone. Eric shoved away from the desk, his breath coming in short gasps. He didn't know what was happening, but he wasn't going to be alone in that mall any longer than he had to. He grabbed his radio. "Tony, I need backup," he said, even though he knew Tony wasn't there. "I'm seeing something weird in the monitors. Someone's in here." Static crackled. Then, faint, barely audible, a voice, not Tony's. "Behind you." Eric spun around so fast he nearly knocked over his chair. But the room was empty. Cold sweat dripped down his back. He wasn't staying. Without bothering to check the monitors again, he grabbed his things, shut down the security feed, and left through the employee exit, locking it behind him. When he got to his car, he sat in silence for a long time, staring at the darkened mall. Something had changed that night, and Eric knew, deep in his bones, that whatever it wasn't over. Story the end.
Story number 3.
The mall was one of those aging, half-forgotten shopping centers that seemed frozen in time. It had been a hub of activity in the 90s, but now with newer, sleeker shopping centers opening up across town, it was dying a slow death. Stores were closing one by one, their spaces left dark and empty. Some remained boarded up for years, never to be reopened. The once lively food court now had only a handful of functioning restaurants. The escalators groaned under the weight of the few remaining shoppers, and some sections of the mall had become eerily deserted, like abandoned corridors of a place that once mattered. Ethan had worked mall security for just under a year. It was an easy job most of the time. Night shifts could be long and tedious, but he didn't mind the quiet. There were only 3 security guards who worked nights, and on most evenings it was just him and his coworker, Paul. They'd take turns making rounds, watching the cameras, and trying not to fall asleep at the desk. There were stories, of course. The old-timers, janitors, maintenance workers, talked about strange things happening in the mall late at night. They said that after 2 a.m. the place didn't feel empty, that doors sometimes unlocked themselves, or that the sound of children laughing would echo through the food court, even though there was no one there. Ethan had laughed at it at first. It was just a mall. It wasn't haunted. But then, one night, something happened that changed his mind. It was a Thursday, and Paul had called in sick. That meant Ethan was alone for the night shift. He didn't mind. Fewer people meant fewer problems. At 1 a.m., he did his usual patrol, walking through the darkened corridors, past storefronts that had long been abandoned. Most of them were stripped bare, only their outlines visible through the dusty glass. As he neared the old Sears, he felt a shift in the air. The store had been closed for years, its doors locked, the space left untouched. But tonight, something felt different. He paused near the entrance. The glass doors were covered in grime, but through them he could barely make out the silhouettes of old fixtures inside. He shined his flashlight at the doors, and then he saw it. A handprint. Small. Too small to belong to an adult. It was pressed against the inside of the glass, like a child had placed it there. Ethan felt his stomach drop. That hadn't been there before. Swallowing hard, he tapped his radio. "Dispatch, this is Ethan. Checking out the old Sears entrance. Possible break-in." The static buzzed, but no response came. He repeated himself. Nothing. With a slow breath, he tried the door handle. Still locked. He shined his flashlight inside again, his heart pounding. Nothing. The store was empty. Maybe it was just an old mark on the glass, something he hadn't noticed before. He was about to move on when he heard it, a soft tap. From inside. Ethan froze. His mind scrambled for a logical explanation. Maybe it was a bird trapped inside, or a piece of loose metal shifting, but then the tapping came again. Soft, slow, deliberate, and then footsteps. They weren't heavy. They were light, almost playful, like a child running. The beam of his flashlight trembled slightly as he stepped back. He knew there was no way anyone was in there. The store had been locked for years. Even if someone had managed to break in, why would they be running around in the dark at this hour? A deep, unsettling fear curled in his stomach. Then, the footsteps stopped. Silence. Ethan forced himself to take a deep breath. "If someone's in there," he called, "you need to come out now. This is security." No response. Then, something moved in the darkness beyond the glass. Ethan's grip on his flashlight tightened. It was just a shape at first, a barely there figure shifting within the blackness. But then it came closer, slowly, carefully. A child. A small boy, maybe 6 or 7 years old, standing just beyond the glass doors, his face partially obscured by the darkness. His clothes were old-fashioned, too old, a sweater with a pattern that looked like something out of the 70s. Ethan took a step back. "Hey, kid," he said, trying to keep his voice steady. "Are you lost? How did you get in there?" The boy didn't answer, didn't move, just stared. Ethan reached for his radio again, his fingers shaking slightly. "Dispatch, I've got a child inside the old Sears. I need someone to check the security footage to see how he got in." Static. Nothing. The boy tilted his head slightly, and then he smiled. It was wrong. Something about it. Too wide. Too forced. The air felt heavier, pressing against Ethan's skin, making it hard to breathe. And then the boy took a step forward, through the glass, not opening the door, not slipping through a crack, through it. Like he wasn't solid, like he wasn't real. Ethan staggered back, nearly dropping his flashlight. The boy's smile grew, and then he disappeared. Not ran, not turned, just vanished. Ethan's heart was hammering in his chest. He scrambled to his feet, breathing hard. He didn't know what he had just seen. But he knew one thing. He wasn't finishing the shift, not alone. The next day, he told Paul everything. Paul didn't laugh. Instead, he looked at Ethan with a strange expression. "You saw him," he said. Ethan frowned. "What?" Paul leaned forward. "The kid. I've heard about him." Ethan's stomach twisted. "What are you talking about?" Paul exhaled. "I heard it from one of the janitors. Back in the 80s, a kid went missing in this mall. His mom turned away for a second, and when she looked back, he was gone. They never found him." Ethan's blood ran cold. Paul continued, his voice quiet. "People say he's still here. that sometimes at night you'll hear little footsteps in the hallways or see small handprints on the glass. Ethan swallowed hard. You believe that? Paul shrugged. I don't know what to believe, but I know one thing. He looked Ethan in the eye. No one works alone in this mall at night. Not for long. Ethan quit his job 2 weeks later. He never set foot in that mall again. But sometimes, even now, when he's walking past an empty store, he swears he still hears it. Soft footsteps, a quiet tap on the glass, and a child's laughter. Story the end.
Story number 4.
The mall had always been a second home to Ava. She had worked there for nearly 4 years, managing one of the small retail stores in the East Wing. It was a job she had taken right out of high school, a simple gig to earn money while figuring out her future. Over the years, she had gotten used to its quirks, how the air always smelled faintly of fried food, how the escalators sometimes groaned as if they were alive, how the flickering lights in the back hallways never got fixed no matter how many times maintenance was called. But there was something different about the mall at night. During the day, it was alive, filled with families, teenagers, and elderly mall walkers. But after closing time, the place changed. It became eerily still. The silence wasn't peaceful, it was oppressive. There were no voices, no footsteps, just the distant hum of electricity running through the walls. Ava had always felt a little uneasy during late night shifts, but nothing had ever happened. Not until that night. It was a Tuesday, which meant the mall closed at 9 p.m. Ava had stayed late to finish some paperwork in the back office, knowing she'd rather get it done now than deal with it the next morning. Her coworker, Brian, had left an hour ago, leaving her alone in the store. She didn't mind. She had done this countless times before. At 10:15 p.m., she finally locked up, making sure the cash register was secure, and the security alarm was set. She stepped out into the main corridor, the weight of her keys in her pocket feeling heavier than usual. The overhead lights were already dimmed, giving the entire place an abandoned look. As she walked toward the employee exit near the food court, she noticed something strange. A store that should have been closed still had its lights on. It was an old electronics store that had been shut down for months, yet the faint glow of fluorescent lighting spilled through the gaps in its metal gate. Ava slowed her steps. Maybe security had left them on, or maybe maintenance was doing some work inside. She glanced around the mall. Aside from a lone janitor mopping the far end of the corridor, she was alone. For some reason, the sight of those lights unsettled her. She shook off the feeling and kept walking. She had parked in the back lot near the loading docks, which meant she had to take the service hallways to get there. These hallways were strictly for employees, narrow, poorly lit corridors that ran behind the stores. As she pushed open the heavy door leading to the back hall, the air instantly felt colder. She had always hated this hallway. It smelled like old cardboard and cleaning supplies, and the walls were lined with large metal doors leading to storage areas. The fluorescent bulbs overhead flickered, casting weird, inconsistent shadows. Ava walked quickly, her sneakers making soft squeaks against the floor. Then she heard it. Footsteps, not her own. She stopped. Silence. Her pulse quickened. Maybe it was just another employee, a security guard, but she hadn't seen anyone else in this section of the mall. Slowly, she turned her head to glance behind her. The hallway was empty. She swallowed hard and kept walking, her fingers tightening around her keyring. The sound came again. This time, it was closer. Ava spun around. Still nothing. The hallway stretched behind her, empty except for the occasional storage door. She took a shaky breath. She was being paranoid. Long shifts and too much caffeine were making her hear things. That had to be it. She kept walking. The exit was just ahead, a red emergency exit sign glowing above it. She pushed forward, her heart pounding harder with every step. Then, just as she reached for the door handle, she heard it. A whisper. It was so faint she almost thought she imagined it. But no, she had heard something. A voice. It was coming from one of the storage rooms. Ava turned her head slowly. One of the metal doors was slightly ajar. She stared at it, dread pooling in her stomach. That door hadn't been opened before. Her breathing became shallow. Maybe security had forgotten to lock it. Maybe it was just the wind, though she knew that was impossible since there were no windows here. Then something moved inside. A dark shape, shifting just beyond the doorway. Ava's entire body went cold. She bolted. She shoved open the exit door, ran into the parking lot, and didn't stop until she reached her car. Her hands trembled as she yanked open the door and threw herself inside, locking it instantly. Her breath came in ragged gasps. She forced herself to look up. The parking lot was nearly empty, just her car and a few others scattered across the lot. The mall loomed behind her, silent and dark. And then a figure stepped out of the service hallway, a tall, thin silhouette. Ava's stomach dropped. The figure stood motionless just outside the exit, partially hidden in the shadows. She couldn't see a face, couldn't tell if it was a man or a woman. Then it started walking, not toward her, toward the side of the building, disappearing behind a row of dumpsters. Ava's hands were shaking as she turned the key in the ignition. Her car roared to life. She didn't wait. She sped out of the parking lot, tires screeching as she turned onto the main road. She didn't stop driving until she reached her apartment. That night, she barely slept. Every sound made her jump. Every shadow in her room felt like it was moving. The next morning, she called Brian and asked if he had ever heard anything weird at the mall after closing. He hesitated, then he said, "You know that electronics store? The one that's been shut down for months?" Ava's blood ran cold. "What about it?" "Security says sometimes the lights turn on by themselves, but there's no power running to it anymore." Ava gripped her phone tighter. "That's not possible," Brian sighed. "I know, but a few months ago, a night guard quit because he swore he saw someone inside." Ava felt sick. She never took another late shift again, and she never, ever walked through that hallway alone. Story the end.
Story number 5.
The mall had always been a safe place for Beth. She had worked there for almost 5 years, managing a mid-sized clothing store called Trendy Threads. It wasn't glamorous, but it paid well enough, and she liked the people she worked with. But the mall was different at night. During the day, it was filled with the noise of people shopping, talking, and laughing. But after closing, it felt unnatural. Too quiet, too still, like something was waiting in the shadows. Beth had always noticed that feeling, but brushed it off as exhaustion or paranoia. After all, she had never actually seen anything strange. Until one night. It was a Thursday, which meant the mall closed at 9 p.m. Beth had stayed behind to do the weekly inventory, something she usually did with her coworker, Kayla. But that night, Kayla had called in sick, leaving Beth to do it alone. She wasn't too worried. She had stayed late plenty of times before. At 10:30 p.m., she locked the store, double-checking the register and security cameras before stepping out into the dim-lit corridor. Most of the other stores were already closed, their metal gates pulled down. The mall's overhead lights had been dimmed, casting long shadows across the polished floors. Beth pulled out her phone to text Tony, the night security guard. "Hey, I just finished up. You still here?" A minute passed. No response. She frowned. Tony usually replied right away. Shrugging it off, she made her way toward the service hallway that led to the employee parking lot. It was the fastest way out, but she hated walking through it. The hallway was narrow and poorly lit, lined with old doors leading to storage rooms and maintenance closets. As she stepped inside, the air felt heavier. She brushed off the uneasy feeling and walked faster, her sneakers making soft squeaks against the tile. Then she heard it. Footsteps. Not her own. Beth froze. She held her breath, straining to listen. Silence. Her pulse quickened. She forced herself to move forward. "It's just your imagination. The hallway echoes." That's what she told herself, but then something moved in her peripheral vision. A shadow. Beth's stomach dropped. Her head snapped toward the end of the hallway. The emergency exit stood there, locked as it always was, but a figure stood just beyond the dim light, still, watching. Beth's mouth went dry. "Tony?" she called, her voice barely above a whisper. The figure didn't move. Beth took a slow step back, gripping her keys so tightly they dug into her palm. The light flickered, and in that brief moment of darkness, the figure was suddenly closer. Beth's heart nearly stopped. She didn't think. She ran. She sprinted through the hallway, her breath coming in short, panicked gasps. She didn't look back. She would not look back. Bursting through the exit door, she stumbled into the parking lot, her legs shaking. She scrambled for her car keys, her hands trembling so badly that she nearly dropped them. Finally, she unlocked her car, yanked the door open, and threw herself inside. Locking the doors, she gasped for air, gripping the steering wheel with white-knuckled hands. Her heart was pounding so hard it hurt. She forced herself to look up. The service hallway door stood wide open, but there was there. Beth stared, her breath coming in shallow gulps. Had she imagined it? No, she knew what she had seen. Something. Someone had been in that hallway. She didn't wait to find out who. She started the car and sped out of the parking lot, not slowing down until she was miles away. She didn't sleep that night. The next morning, she debated whether to tell anyone. Maybe she had just been overtired. Maybe it had been a trick of the light. But when she arrived at work, she overheard a conversation that made her stomach turn. Tony, the security guard, was talking to a coworker at the food court. "Weirdest thing," he was saying. "I swear I heard footsteps in the service hallway last night. When I checked the cameras, there was nothing there." Beth's hands went cold. She never took the service hallway again, and she never, ever stayed late alone. Story the end.
Story number 6.
The mall had always been a second home to Kayla. She had been working at Lacey's, one of the last remaining department stores in the Ridgefield Mall, for almost 5 years. It wasn't a glamorous job, but it was steady, and in a town where jobs were scarce, that was good enough for her. Ridgefield Mall had been a lively place when she was a kid, but now it was dying. Store after store had closed, leaving only a handful of businesses still open. The food court was nearly empty, save for a single fast food place that still clung to life, and the once bustling hallways had become eerily quiet. Kayla usually worked the closing shift, which meant she was one of the last people in the mall at night. The only other employees around were a couple of security guards and some janitors who barely spoke to her. She had gotten used to the emptiness, to the way the lights dimmed just a little after closing, to the way her footsteps echoed too loudly against the tiled floors. She had always told herself there was nothing to be afraid of, until the night she realized she wasn't alone. It was a Thursday, just after 10 p.m., and Kayla was finishing up her closing duties. She had done her usual walkthrough of the store, making sure all the dressing rooms were empty, folding a few stray sweaters, and locking up the registers. The last thing she had to do was take out the trash. The employee exit was at the back of the store, down a long, narrow hallway that led to a set of double doors. Beyond that was a loading dock where the dumpsters were. She had done this 100 times before, so she didn't think twice when she grabbed the trash bags and pushed through the doors. The air outside was cold, and the loading dock was as empty as ever. The only light came from a flickering overhead lamp, casting long, shaky shadows against the walls. Kayla walked quickly, tossing the bags into the dumpster and rubbing her arms against the chill. Then she heard it, a soft rustling sound. She turned sharply, eyes scanning the shadows. "Hello?" she called. Silence. It was probably just the wind, she told herself, but as she turned back toward the doors, she heard it again. A faint shuffling noise, like footsteps. Kayla's heart began to race. She wasn't the type to scare easily, but something about the sound put her on edge. She glanced toward the far end of the loading dock, where an old storage area had been abandoned years ago. The metal door was slightly ajar, swaying just a little. She told herself to ignore it. Just go inside, lock the doors, and finish closing up. But then she saw something move. A shadow, just at the edge of the dim light. Kayla felt her breath catch in her throat. It was tall, human-shaped, but something about it was off. She took a step back, gripping the door handle. "Hey!" she called out, trying to sound more confident than she felt. "This is private property. You need to leave." The shadow didn't respond, didn't move, just stood there. Her hands were shaking as she yanked open the door and slammed it shut behind her, locking it as fast as she could. Her heart pounded as she pressed her back against the cool metal, listening. Silence. After a few minutes, she forced herself to breathe normally. Maybe it was just her imagination. Maybe she had just been jumpy because of how empty the mall was. She made her way back inside, shaking off the nerves, but just as she passed by the fitting rooms, she noticed something strange. One of the dressing room doors was open. She was sure, absolutely sure, she had checked all of them before she went outside. A slow chill crept down her spine. She stepped forward hesitantly, gripping the edge of the door. "Hello?" she called, her voice barely above a whisper. No answer. She pushed the door open all the way. The small room was empty. But on the mirror, written in what looked like smeared fingerprints, were 3 words. I saw you. Kayla's stomach twisted. Her breath hitched. She stumbled back, her mind racing. She hadn't seen anyone come into the store. She was sure of it. The only way in was through the front, and she had locked it an hour ago. The mall was empty. Wasn't it? She didn't even think. She grabbed her bag from behind the counter, turned off the lights, and bolted for the employee exit. She didn't care about finishing her closing duties. She just wanted out. The mall was eerily quiet as she stepped into the main corridor. The security office was near the food court, and she was about to make a run for it when she heard something. Footsteps. Soft. Quick. Behind her. She froze. Her pulse pounded in her ears. Slowly, she turned, and she saw him. A man. Tall. Thin. Standing in the dimly lit hallway near the entrance to the old abandoned movie theater. He wasn't moving, just standing there, watching her. Kayla's breath came in short gasps. Who are you? She whispered. No response. She took a step back. He took a step forward. That was enough. She turned and ran. Her feet pounded against the tiled floor as she sprinted toward the food court, toward the security office. She didn't dare look back. When she reached the office, she banged on the door, desperate. Open up, please. A moment later, the door swung open and Carl, one of the night guards, stared at her in confusion. What the hell? There's someone in the mall, she gasped. A man. He was standing near the theater. Carl frowned, glancing down the hallway. You're sure? Yes, she said, her voice shaking. I saw him. I swear. Carl sighed and grabbed his flashlight. Stay here. I'll check it out. No, she said, panic rising in her throat. You don't understand. But Carl was already walking down the hall. Kayla waited, every second feeling like an eternity. And then, Carl returned. His expression was unreadable. There's no one there. Kayla's stomach twisted. No, that's not possible. I saw him. He was right there. Carl shook his head. I checked the whole area. It's empty. She opened her mouth to argue, but then she saw something on the monitor behind him. One of the security cameras. The one facing the theater entrance. The screen flickered, and for just a moment, just long enough to send ice through her veins, a shadow appeared. Tall, thin, standing in the exact spot she had seen him. And then, gone. Carl turned to look at the screen. What the hell? Kayla didn't wait for an explanation. She grabbed her bag and ran. She quit her job the next day. A few weeks later, she got a message from Paul, another security guard. They found something, he wrote. What? She typed back, her hands shaking. Paul sent her a link, an old news article, about Ridgefield Mall, about a man who had been living inside the abandoned movie theater for years, a man who had been stalking employees, a man who had gone missing after security chased him out one night, a man whose body had never been found. Kayla never went back to the mall, but sometimes, late at night, she swears she still hears it. Soft footsteps. Behind her. Story the end.
Story number 7.
The mall had always been a second home to Emily. She had worked at Horizon Mall for almost 6 years, managing a small bookstore tucked between a shoe store and a jewelry boutique. It wasn't a big store, and it didn't get as much foot traffic as the trendier shops, but that's why she loved it. It was quiet, peaceful, a small escape from the chaotic world outside. But late at night, after closing, the mall was anything but peaceful. Emily had never liked working the closing shift alone. She had done it plenty of times, of course, but there was something unsettling about an empty mall. During the day, it was bright and full of life. After hours, it felt hollow. The air itself seemed heavier, as if something unseen lurked in the corners, watching. She always shrugged it off. Just her imagination, she told herself, until one night proved her wrong. It was a Thursday, and the mall closed at 9 p.m. Emily was supposed to have another employee with her, but Sarah had called in sick, leaving her to close alone. It wasn't a big deal. She had done it before. She followed her usual routine, counting the register, locking the display cases, and making sure the store was tidy before shutting off the lights. By 9:45 p.m., she was ready to leave. She stepped out into the dimly lit corridor, pulling the metal security gown behind her with a loud clatter. The overhead lights had already been dimmed, casting long shadows along the polished tile floors. Most of the other stores were already locked up, their gates secured. The only sound was the faint hum of the ventilation system. She pulled out her phone and texted Jeff, one of the mall security guards. Emily, hey, I'm heading out now. You still doing rounds? A minute passed. No response. She frowned. Jeff usually responded quickly. Shrugging it off, she started walking toward the back exit. She had parked in the employee lot behind the mall, which meant taking the service hallway. It was a long, narrow corridor lined with storage rooms and maintenance doors, and she hated walking through it alone. As she pushed open the heavy door leading to the hallway, the air immediately felt colder. She ignored the prickling sensation at the back of her neck and quickened her pace. The exit wasn't far, just a couple 100 feet ahead. Then she heard it. A soft, shuffling sound behind her. Her breath caught in her throat. She stopped, listened. Silence. Her fingers tightened around her phone. It was probably just Jeff finishing his rounds. Jeff, she called out, her voice barely above a whisper. No response. The hairs on her arms stood on end. She took a slow step forward. Then she heard it again, a footstep. Closer this time. Her pulse quickened. She turned her head, glancing behind her. The hallway was empty. She swallowed hard. You're imagining things. Just get to your car. She forced herself to keep walking. The exit was just ahead. A red emergency exit sign glowed above the door. Just a few more steps. Then a whisper. It was so faint she almost thought she imagined it, but no. She had heard something. A voice. A man's voice. It was coming from behind one of the storage room doors. Emily's stomach dropped. She knew that those doors were supposed to be locked. Only employees and security had access to them. Slowly, she turned her head toward the sound. One of the doors about 10 feet behind her was slightly ajar. She could see a sliver of darkness beyond it. A cold chill ran down her spine. Her breathing became shallow. Every instinct screamed at her to run. But her body was frozen. Then something moved in the darkness beyond the door. A shadow. A figure. That was all she needed. She bolted. She sprinted toward the exit, her breath coming in short, panicked gasps. The sound of her footsteps echoed loudly against the walls. She didn't look back. She couldn't. She shoved open the door and stumbled into the parking lot. The cold night air hit her like a slap. She fumbled for her car keys, her hands shaking so badly that she nearly dropped them. Finally, she unlocked the car, yanked the door open, and threw herself inside. Locking the doors, she gasped for air, gripping the steering wheel with white-knuckled hands. Her heart pounded so hard it hurt. She forced herself to look up. The service hallway door stood wide open, but there was no one there. The parking lot was empty, silent. Her stomach twisted. Had she imagined it? No. She knew what she had seen. Something had been in that hallway. She didn't wait to find out who. She started the car and sped out of the parking lot, not slowing down until she was miles away. She didn't sleep that night. The next morning, she debated whether to tell anyone. Maybe it had just been her imagination. Maybe she was just overtired. But when she arrived at work, she overheard a conversation that made her blood run cold. Jeff, the security guard, was talking to another employee in the food court. Weirdest thing, he was saying. I swear I heard footsteps in the service hallway last night. When I checked the cameras, there was nothing there. Emily's stomach dropped. Her fingers tightened around the strap of her bag. She stepped closer. What do you mean, nothing there? She asked. Jeff turned to her, looking slightly embarrassed. The cameras didn't pick up anything, he said. But I know I heard something. Emily's mouth went dry. She hesitated. Then, finally, she asked, Has anything weird ever happened back there before? Jeff gave her a strange look. You don't know, he asked. Know what? She said, her voice barely above a whisper. Jeff sighed. A few years ago, a worker went missing after closing. He was last seen heading to the service hallway to take out the trash. He shook his head. They never found him. A cold chill ran down Emily's spine. She forced herself to swallow. And the cameras? She asked. Did they show anything? Jeff hesitated. Then he said no. A beat of silence. Then he added, but the last footage of him showed him stopping outside one of the storage doors. Emily's heart pounded. Jeff's voice dropped to a whisper. And the door opened by itself. Emily felt her stomach twist into knots. She never worked a closing shift alone again. And she never, ever walked through that hallway at night. Story the end.
Story number 8.
The mall had always been a place of life, of noise, of movement. But as the years passed and new shopping centers were built across town, Westvale Mall had slowly begun to die. Stores closed, the food court emptied, and the once busy corridors turned into hollow echoes of what they used to be. The management tried to keep up appearances, but everyone knew it was only a matter of time before the doors shut for good. Jenna had been working at the mall for over 4 years. She was an assistant manager at a small clothing boutique called Bell Moda, one of the few remaining stores still clinging to survival. It wasn't her dream job, but it paid the bills. She was used to working late shifts, closing the store alone, and walking through the quiet, dimly lit halls to get to her car. It had always been a little creepy at night, but she told herself it was just her imagination. That was until the night she saw something she couldn't explain. It was a Friday, close to 10 p.m. Jenna was finishing up her closing duties, counting the register, tidying up the front displays, when she heard it. A soft knock. Not at the main entrance, which was already locked, but from the stockroom in the back. She froze. The stockroom had no outside entrance. The only way in or out was through the store itself. Holding her breath, Jenna listened. Silence. She shook her head, telling herself it was just the old building settling. That happened all the time, right? She finished counting the cash and locked the register. Just as she was about to grab her bag and head out, she heard it again, a single, deliberate knock. Jenna's stomach twisted. She took a cautious step toward the stockroom door. "Hello," she called out. No response. Her heart was pounding as she reached for the handle. Slowly, she turned it and pushed the door open. The stockroom was empty. The shelves were neatly stocked, the overhead light humming softly. Jenna let out a breath. She was just being paranoid. But as she turned to leave, she noticed something. One of the supply boxes had been moved. It had been on the top shelf when she had last been in here. Now it was on the floor, lid slightly askew. A chill ran down her spine. Maybe it had fallen. Maybe one of the shelves was uneven. She hurried back into the main store, shutting the stockroom door behind her. She grabbed her bag and keys, eager to leave. As she turned to shut off the store lights, she caught sight of something in the large floor-length mirror near the dressing rooms. A reflection. Someone standing behind her. Jenna spun around so fast she nearly tripped, but there was no one there. She stood frozen, her breath coming in short gasps. The store was silent, empty. Shaking, she turned back to the mirror. The reflection was gone. She didn't wait any longer. She shut off the lights, locked the store, and speed walked through the mall toward the nearest exit. As she passed the empty storefronts, she noticed how eerily quiet everything was. Most of the overhead lights had been dimmed, casting long, dark shadows across the tiled floor. Then she heard it. Footsteps. Not hers. They were light, careful, but distinct, following her. Jenna's pulse skyrocketed. She turned her head slightly, trying to catch a glimpse without fully looking back. Nothing. The corridor was empty. She quickened her pace, gripping her keys tightly in her fist. The exit was just ahead. The footsteps quickened too. Her heart pounded as she reached the glass doors, shoving them open and stepping into the cold night air. Silence. She turned sharply, expecting to see someone standing just inside the mall. But there was no one there. Only the empty, dimly lit hallway stretching behind her. Jenna practically ran to her car, locking the doors the second she got inside. Her hands were shaking as she started the engine. She didn't look back as she drove away. The next morning, she told her coworker Mia about what had happened. Mia's face went pale. "You saw him," she whispered. Jenna frowned. "Saw who?" Mia hesitated, then leaned in closer. "I wasn't going to say anything, but weird stuff happens here at night." Jenna felt her stomach tighten. "What kind of weird stuff?" Mia lowered her voice. "I've heard footsteps when no one's there. Whispers, too, and sometimes things move by themselves in the stockroom. Last month, I swear I saw someone standing outside the store after closing, but when I looked again, they were gone." Jenna's skin prickled. "You never told me this." Mia shrugged. "I didn't want to freak you out." Jenna was about to respond when the mall's head of security, Rick, walked by. She stopped him. "Hey, Rick, do you guys ever see anything weird on the security cameras at night?" Rick paused, rubbing his chin. "What do you mean?" Jenna hesitated. "Like people walking around after hours, or doors opening on their own?" Rick's expression darkened. He glanced around before lowering his voice. "You're not the first person to ask that. Jenna exchanged a nervous glance with Mia. So, you have seen something? Rick sighed. A couple of months ago, we started noticing strange things on the cameras. Shadows moving when there shouldn't be anyone there. Doors opening on their own, and once, one of the janitors swore he saw someone standing in the food court, just staring at the camera. But when we checked the footage, there was no one there. A shiver ran down Jenna's spine. Mia swallowed. Do you think it's a ghost? Rick gave a humorless chuckle. I don't know what the hell it is. All I know is that this mall is old, and a lot of people have worked here over the years. Some say a guy died in the back hallways back in the 80s. Some say a girl disappeared from the parking lot in the 90s and was never found. Jenna felt like she couldn't breathe. You're joking, right? Rick shook his head. I don't joke about stuff like that. That was enough for Jenna. She quit her job the following week. She never stepped foot in the mall again. A few months later, Westvale Mall officially shut down. But sometimes when she drives past the empty building at night, she swears she still sees it. A shadow, standing just inside the glass doors, watching. Story the end.
Story number 9.
I had always loved the energy of a busy mall. Growing up, I remember how vibrant the shopping centers were, filled with people, music, food, and life. But by the time I got my first job at the mall, things had changed. The once bustling shopping hub had started to lose its appeal. Retail stores were closing down, new shopping areas were opening up in other parts of the city, and fewer people came through the mall's doors. Yet, somehow, I ended up working in the once popular department store, Glimmers, one of the few places still surviving. I worked as a cashier and occasionally helped restock items or fold clothes during my late-night shifts. The mall was open until midnight, and I usually worked the closing shifts, which meant I had to lock up and ensure everything was safe. The store manager, Derek, would leave around 9 p.m., and I'd be left alone in the vast, empty store. It wasn't the most glamorous job, but it paid well enough, and I liked the peace and quiet once the crowds had cleared out. At first, everything was fine, but as time went on, I started to feel an unsettling presence, something that made the hair on the back of my neck stand up whenever I was alone. I brushed it off as my imagination, telling myself that the isolation was getting to me. But deep down, I knew something was off. It started with small things, little oddities that didn't make sense. At first, it was the feeling of being watched, like someone was standing just behind me, even though I was alone. Then, there was the time I had walked into the break room to find the light flickering, even though the bulb had been replaced the day before. And I couldn't forget the rustling noises that seemed to come from the back hallway, though no one was there. The store had an old feel to it. Creaky floors, dusty shelves, and strange echoes in the aisles, especially when it was empty. I was starting to get more anxious at night, but it wasn't until the night of my shift on the 19th of March that things truly took a terrifying turn. It was a particularly quiet evening. The mall was nearly empty, and the hum of the air conditioning system was the only sound that broke the silence. I had just finished mopping the floor and was about to lock up when I noticed something strange in the corner of the store, near the fitting rooms. A tall figure stood, motionless, staring at one of the mirrors. I blinked and rubbed my eyes, thinking I was seeing things, but when I looked again, the figure was still there. It was a man, tall, thin, with dark, shaggy hair that hung in his face, his posture unnaturally rigid. He wore a worn leather jacket and faded jeans, his back turned slightly, but his face was angled toward the mirror. For a moment, I thought it was a customer who had wandered in and gotten confused, but then I realized something chilling. The store had been locked up for hours. There were no customers, and there hadn't been any employees in the store except for me since Derek had left. "Hello?" I called out, my voice trembling. "Can I help you?" The figure didn't move. He just stood there, still as a statue. My heart started pounding in my chest as I slowly took a step forward, my feet barely making a sound on the worn linoleum floor. The man didn't respond. I called out again, this time louder, my voice shaky. "Sir?" Nothing. I was too scared to approach him, but I couldn't just leave him there either. Something didn't feel right. I quickly backed away, retreating toward the front of the store, when I suddenly heard the distinct sound of the fitting room door creaking open. I froze. The fitting room doors were supposed to be locked, and the key was in my pocket. The rustling sound continued, like someone was moving around in one of the stalls. The fear washed over me in waves, but my curiosity got the best of me. I slowly walked back toward the fitting rooms, my steps hesitant and cautious. As I reached the doors, I heard something that made my blood run cold. A whisper. It was a voice, low and guttural, coming from the shadows behind the fitting room doors. The voice was barely audible, but the words were unmistakable. "You shouldn't have come." I stumbled backward, my pulse racing. My mind was racing too, trying to make sense of what was happening. This couldn't be real. There was no one else in the store. No one had come in. But just as I turned to run, I heard it again. A soft, deliberate knock on the back wall of the fitting room, followed by another voice, this time louder. "Leave now or it will be too late." I didn't hesitate this time. I sprinted toward the front of the store, nearly tripping over my own feet. My breath was ragged as I reached the glass doors of the entrance. I fumbled for the key, my hands shaking uncontrollably, and locked them shut. The thought of turning around, of checking the store again, made my stomach churn. I wasn't alone. I didn't care about the store anymore. I just needed to get out. I rushed out through the back door, which led to the employee parking lot, and jumped into my car. My heart was still pounding, my mind reeling. I couldn't shake the image of that man standing in front of the mirror. But what terrified me most were the voices, the whispers, and the feeling that something was watching me, waiting for me to make a mistake. The next day, I didn't go to work. I called in sick, unable to shake the terror that had gripped me. I had a feeling that something was wrong with that mall, something that I couldn't explain. It wasn't just the strange noises or the figures in the mirrors. It was the overwhelming sense that I wasn't supposed to be there. When I returned to work a few days later, Derek seemed oblivious to my absence. No one had mentioned anything strange happening, and I didn't dare speak up about what I had seen. But as the weeks went by, things only seemed to escalate. Other employees started reporting similar experiences. Unexplained footsteps in the halls, things moving around, even doors opening on their own. Everyone brushed it off, chalking it up to old building quirks or stress. But deep down, I knew it was something more than that. I eventually found out from an old janitor, a man who'd worked at the mall for decades, that there had been rumors of strange occurrences going back years. People claimed to have seen figures in the mirrors, heard voices, and felt an overwhelming sense of dread while walking through certain parts of the building, particularly around the fitting rooms. He said there had been rumors of someone who had never quite left, a man who had disappeared under strange circumstances many years ago, and whose presence still lingered in the walls. And that man, the one I had seen staring in the mirror, the janitor swore it was him, the one who had never really left. I don't work at the mall anymore. I left the job the very next day, unable to shake the memories of what happened. I never went back, and I never will. But every once in a while, when I drive past the mall on my way home, I swear I see something in the reflection of the glass doors. A shadow, standing just behind the entrance, watching, waiting. Story the end.
Story number 10.
Westfield Mall had always been a place of comfort for me. My entire life, I had been drawn to the comforting sounds of shoppers, the scent of pretzels in the food court, and the hum of fluorescent lights overhead. It was and still is a place I associate with familiarity and routine. I had worked at a store in the mall for years. It was a simple job: cash register, stocking shelves, helping customers find what they needed. Nothing too thrilling, but it paid the bills. And in a dying retail world, I was just happy to have steady hours. Westfield Mall wasn't what it used to be. Over the years, more stores had closed than I could count. The large department stores that once held them all together had shut their doors, and newer, more trendy shopping centers opened up nearby, siphoning away the crowds. Now, Westfield had a sense of quiet abandonment. The parking lot was almost always half empty. The food court, which used to be buzzing with families and teenagers, was now just a few souls sitting at far tables, nursing their last bites of fast food before heading out into the night. Only the loyal few stores remained open, and we all felt the pinch. But it was the routine of the place, the rhythm, that kept it alive for me. That was until something changed. It started with the whispers. The first time I heard them, I chalked it up to exhaustion. I had just finished an overnight shift, staying late to stock merchandise and fix the sales floor after hours. I had been working in the store alone since about 10 p.m., with the mall slowly emptying out around me. By the time I wrapped up, it was nearing 2 a.m. The mall's lights had already dimmed, casting long shadows across the wide corridors. It wasn't unusual for me to be the last person in the store, finishing the last bits of work. But the quiet, the isolation, it felt different that night. Heavy. I was halfway through mopping the floor when I heard the soft murmurs, just faint enough to think I was imagining it. I paused, listening. The whispers seemed to be coming from the hallway just outside the store. I didn't think too much of it, assuming maybe it was another employee or security. But as I continued working, the voices grew louder. I froze mid-swipe, wiping my brow. There was no one else in the store. I would have seen anyone who walked by. I cautiously walked toward the front of the store, glancing down the empty mall corridor. All the lights were on, casting a sterile, pale glow across the tiled floor. There was no one in sight. I stepped back into the store and locked the door, even though it had already been secured. Still, the whispers continued. It was a weird, low murmuring, something that sounded like voices overlapping but not quite intelligible. I figured it was probably just my tired mind playing tricks on me. A combination of the late hour and the emptiness had caused my senses to sharpen, making things seem strange. But it didn't stop. The next time it happened, I had been alone in the stockroom. I'd gone in to grab a box of shirts from the back, and as I was bending down to lift it, I heard the whispering again. This time, it was closer. A voice, or several voices, murmuring in a low, almost rhythmic cadence. It felt like they were right behind me. I spun around, expecting to see someone standing there. But the stockroom was empty, the shelves stacked with neatly folded clothes. I thought I was losing it. I couldn't even explain why I was hearing voices. It had been a rough week, filled with long shifts and little sleep, and I hadn't been feeling myself. But that didn't explain why. When I walked to the back of the store to check the security cameras, the footage showed absolutely no one. I didn't say anything to anyone at work. It seemed too silly, too strange. I just continued on with my shifts. But the whispers didn't stop. Over the next week, they only grew louder and more persistent. They followed me through the hallways. They echoed from the corners of the food court. They lingered in the employee break room, growing louder the longer I stayed in there. It was almost like something was following me, watching me, making its presence known without showing itself. And every night, I would hear them. I would hear the whispers getting closer. At first, I thought maybe it was the air vents or some sort of weird acoustics in the building. But after weeks of hearing it, I couldn't ignore it anymore. It felt personal, like someone or something was trying to communicate. The final straw came on a cold Friday night, 2 weeks after I had first heard the whispers. I had closed up the store early, around 10:30 p.m., since there weren't many customers and there was no point in staying open. I was locking the doors when I noticed a figure standing across the hall near one of the old abandoned stores. A tall man, dressed in a dark coat, his face shadowed by the dim light. He didn't seem to notice me at first, just standing there, unmoving. My heart raced. It was odd. The mall was practically empty, and no one was supposed to be wandering around so late. I called out to him, but he didn't respond. Something in my gut told me that it wasn't just some confused shopper who had lost his way. I watched him for several moments, waiting for him to move. But he didn't. He just stood there, staring straight ahead. I felt the cold knot of fear tighten in my chest. I was just about to turn and call security when I saw him move. Slowly, he turned his head toward me. At first, I thought I had imagined it, but no. His eyes were now fixed directly on me, and there was something unsettling about his gaze. It wasn't a glance or even curiosity. It was as if he were studying me. And then he smiled. It was a slow, chilling smile that stretched unnaturally wide across his face. His lips cracked open as if to speak, but there was no sound. I froze. My breath caught in my throat. In a moment of sheer panic, I darted into the store and locked the door behind me. I couldn't bring myself to look back. I quickly grabbed my phone and dialed the security desk. I don't remember what I said exactly, but I told them there was someone in the mall who didn't belong. Security responded almost immediately, assuring me they would check it out. I stayed in the store, too afraid to leave, my eyes constantly on the front door. The mall was eerily quiet, and I could still hear the faint whispers, Landpleicher, even inside the store. After what felt like an eternity, security finally called to say they had found the man, but there was no trace of him. I don't know what it was. Maybe it was a prank, or maybe something more. The whispers stopped after that night, but the fear lingered. I was never able to shake the memory of that smile or the way the man had looked at me, like he had been waiting for something. The following Monday, I quit my job. I couldn't bring myself to go back to that mall, to be in that place where something so wrong had happened. I heard that the man I had seen, who had never been found, wasn't the only strange occurrence at the mall. In fact, several other employees had shared similar experiences. Some had heard the whispers too. Others had seen figures in the corners of their vision or felt a cold breath against their necks. I don't know what happened to Westfield Mall after I left. I never went back, and I never will. Every time I drive past it, I can't help but look up at the dimly lit building, the mall sitting in the distance like a giant silent witness to something that can't be explained, something that still lingers in the air. Sometimes when I pass by at night, I swear I see something in the windows. A shadow, waiting. Story the end.